You are listening to a panel conversation recorded live on Tuesday, the 11th of November, 2025, following the performance of Punch at the Apollo Theatre, Shaftesbury Avenue. The conversation is part of the After the Punch series, curated by the Forgiveness Project. The speakers are Steve Chalke, Dr. Gwen Adshead, Emma Pallant, and Danielle Manson, with thanks to Oasis Restore for co-hosting this talk.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Manson. I am a criminal barrister at Matrix Chambers, and I'm going to be hosting this wonderful panel that we've got tonight. The title, or the subject matter, is Invisible Wounds: How do we understand the effect of harm passed down the generations and empower young people to live well and thrive? And this is, I think, the seventh post-show panel that has been organised, and it's been curated by the Forgiveness Project in partnership with this wonderful, amazing production. I have to say, I didn't watch it tonight because I knew that I would be way too emotional if I'd sat and gone through what you guys have gone through and then had to come and chair this panel. But I have seen it 3 times already. And so we've got some brilliant, amazing speakers. Obviously, you will all recognise Emma Pallant, who is sitting closest to me. And then next to Emma, we've got Dr. Gwen Adshead, who's a forensic psychotherapist, and I think you're going to speak about some of your experience and practice. And then next to Gwen, we have got Steve Chalke, who is the founder of Oasis Trust. And the way the panel is going to work is we've got 3 questions that we are going to just bat about between us. I may come to people in the audience at some point, but what we're also going to do is leave some time at the end for any questions that anybody's got based on what you've seen tonight or what you hear us talking about. Okay, well, let's just get into it, as the kids say on TikTok. So, question number 1. I think what I'd probably like to put out, maybe Gwen, we're talking about intergenerational trauma and those sorts of invisible wounds, but what do we mean by that? I mean, what is that?
Well, what I understand by intergenerational trauma is the way that parents distress, their unresolved pain, their unresolved fears, their own experiences as young people. And as they get older and when they become parents, if those kinds of distress aren't always resolved, they can be handed on to the next generation. And I'm reminded of a very famous quote by a guy called Richard Rohr, who says that if you don't transform your pain, you will surely transmit it. And I think when we talk about intergenerational trauma, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about how adults unwittingly can transmit their pain and their distress, their fear and their rage to the children that they're caring for. And then, of course, the cycle begins when the next generation become parents. So that's what I understand by intergenerational trauma.
Stephen, is that the same for you in terms of your work? Yeah, I mean,
everything that Gwen's just said. When I began Oasis, which was 40 years ago, the first ever project I set up, Oasis was just me really then, is a house for young people, 16 plus, young people who'd never been loved, never been cared for, had lived on the streets or sofa surfed and been in trouble with the police, but not actually ever sentenced for anything in a custodial sense. And we opened this house for them to come and live in. And with my wife, who's here, we prepared for this. Do you know, I'd given up my job to do this. And we worked and worked and worked and finally got hold of this house, which was falling apart, and done it up and put pictures on the walls. And I mean, we made it as the best we could. 16 young people came to live with us. And I remember the morning when the first young 16-year-old arrived. And I was so proud of what we created, and I was ready to welcome them. And I knew they'd be grateful, but they looked at the floor. They looked away. They wouldn't even look at me. There was never a please, never a thank you, nothing. They scowled at me. They were aggressive. And then 15 others like them arrived over the next few weeks. And then worse than that, they stole the stuff that we provided. They took the pictures. They took the telly that I bought so they could all watch Match of the Day. Everything was stolen. They stole their own stuff. And I was so angry with them.
Sounds like Les Mis. Sounds like Les Mis.
Yeah, exactly. So angry with them. And it took me a long time. This was before neuroscience was a thing. You know, this was back in the 80s, before we understood the juvenile adolescent brain in the way that we can now, but we're still learning, of course. And it suddenly dawned on me one day that the problem was mine, not actually theirs, because of this intergenerational poverty that they had. I realized that if they had broken limbs, arms, legs, I would have opened doors for them. I would have compensated for them. But to your expression, their wounds were invisible. That's all I could think. Their wounds were in their heads. And subsequently, of course, what I've learned is what Gwen has just talked about, that a child's brain isn't a sponge. We often say kids are sponge, their brain's a sponge, they just soak stuff up. A child's brain isn't a sponge, it's more like plasticine. It can be molded, and molded well, or misshapen. And once it's misshapen, like Gwen was saying in the intergenerational thing, because the child becomes the mother, the boy becomes the dad, and it's passed on. But that misshapenness that's baked in, that anger, that fear, those poor responses, those antisocial rather than pro-social responses are baked in there. That's what intergenerational poverty, intergenerational trauma is.
And I mean, I should say I'm, as I said, a criminal barrister, but I specialise in representing children and young people. And so often I receive children who have had a negative experience, intergenerational trauma. And I tend to dig into that because that's one thing that I want to talk to the judge about, or that's one thing I want to advance in mitigation. But it's almost too late by that point to be raising those issues, because when I do it, I'm trying to keep someone out of prison, whereas actually engaging with it slightly earlier might have led to a different outcome. Emma, I just wanted to ask you something, because obviously everyone has seen your wonderful performance playing Jacob's mum, but we also know that she's very sadly no longer with us. And I think you've spoken previously about feeling like you're sort of holding that space for her. And I just wanted to understand what that process has been like for you. And I suppose what your response to the question would be, maybe with that in mind.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. I suppose just speaking to that a little bit, it would be that most of the characters in this play are either based on somebody real or a hybrid of real people. And for a lot of us, we were blessed to be able to meet the real people and ask them questions, read their testimony, hear them on podcasts. Wendy, for example, I'm very lucky to know in real life, who's an extraordinary person. But Jacob's mum, obviously, as is reflected in the story, wasn't here for that. And so the responsibility of holding her story, but also not trying to replicate her life, because I couldn't ask her, I couldn't really find out, and nor did I really want to invade Jacob's privacy. So I've kind of responded to the script rather than the real person, if that makes sense to you. But speaking to that point about handing trauma on, the things that are true, as I understand them from her life, are she was adopted, she lived on that estate, she was a single parent, she had her own business, which was in her home. You know, there are all of these challenges which are leaving her, I would imagine, and this is purely in my imagination as I didn't have a chance to ask her, depleted in emotional energy. It must just be exhausting to live that life. With two young boys who were trying to make their way. And so I suppose that's the point where I connect to that thing that you were saying, where trying to just represent and present somebody for whom that was their reality. But as I say, I can't really speak to the reality of that, only the imagined version of Jacob's mum, if that makes sense.
Well, you do a very good job. Okay, so similar theme, but I guess just moving on a little bit and maybe thinking about causes and consequences. What do we all think perhaps the unseen forces of this intergenerational trauma and sort of the pain that young people are experiencing today? What do we think those unseen forces are or look like? Gwen, if I could start with you.
Well, there's lots of things to consider, but one of the most interesting things in terms of neuroscience, you mentioned Steve earlier on, one of the most interesting things that's coming up right now in the research is about the impact of neglect. We know that there are different kinds of childhood adversity that can have a long-term effect on your health physical health as an adult and your mental health as an adult. And of the different kinds of childhood adversity that we know make a big difference to people, children being exposed to physical violence in particular seems to be quite a potent predictor of later violent offending. But it's looking like neglect is also, emotional neglect, physical neglect is also a potent risk factor for transgenerational trauma. And that's something that perhaps we need to get really interested in. This is an opportunity for us to think about just what an enormous challenge it is to make your mind available to your children. This is really what you're talking about, Emma, and I thought you depicted beautifully the pain of a woman really struggling to care for her children, but also feeling helpless. And I wonder whether issues about how we help people feel able to pay the kind of attention to children that we know really makes a difference. And you'll know about this, Steve.
Well, yeah, and of course we are living through this post-COVID avalanche, aren't we? Because in those early years, we see it in our schools. We run 55 schools around the country. We see it in our schools. We only work in socio-economically deprived communities, or as I prefer to call them, underserved and under-listened to and underheard communities. But you see this poverty or this trauma rise up, the poverty of a home for a mum who hasn't got the emotional energy to invest in her children. When you've got two parents and they're middle class and they're both earning and they, et cetera, they don't have to fight for food. They don't have to do 2 or 3 jobs to put food on the table. So they've got the time to invest. But as Gwen says, this neglect sets in, which is a poverty, isn't it? And so by the time a child hits school, those first 3 or 4 years of their life, that neglect, that's the greatest poverty, perhaps, and it cripples them. And the other thing I want to say, because that's, about causes, poverty is a huge determinator of where you're going to end up in life. I get a chance to lecture in universities, which is rather wonderful and all the rest of it, but you're talking to very educated people, not necessarily the most intelligent people, and that's not to deny that people who go to university are very intelligent, but I see hundreds, thousands of kids who are just as intelligent, but robbed of opportunity, and robbed of that opportunity by poverty. The second thing to say, the consequence of this is, there's a 12-year-old lad who grows up neglected, and we all, charities kind of fundraise off the back of it. Here's this picture of this kid, and he's got nothing going for him, and no one's ever loved him or given him any time. Let's give money, let's give money, let's give money. 4 years later, that same kid that we were so concerned about stabs someone in the street because he is a victim of modern slavery. He's been exploited into a gang, and we say, lock him up, thug. So the dad or the mum is when we're talking about these mums, they're a few years older than the girls they were whilst they were being abused. And that's the intergenerational nature of this. And we've got to learn instead of locking him up and throwing away the key, because prison does no good. You know, I know Jacob, as you just depicted, but I know Jacob well. He came out of prison a worse man than he went in, because you can't punish somebody into health. You can't heal them through hurting them. We've got to learn as a society.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's also a flip side as well, isn't there? And the reality is there are lots of people who do experience intergenerational trauma and then use it in a positive way. And I suppose one thing that I'm more than happy to share with the audience today is that obviously I'm a criminal barrister now, my family's thrilled with that, but both my parents were actually in prison when I was growing up. My dad was in prison, my mum raised me as a single parent, and then when I was 10, my mum was arrested, charged with a very serious criminal offence. She was denied bail initially, and so spent 6 weeks in custody away from me in quite sort of traumatic, unplanned circumstances, and that was obviously something that I experienced at that age. But that is something that I have used in my career to try and advance my position. So,
and that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, this is Gwen's expertise. Every human brain is as different as every fingerprint. So what works for me or works for you or someone else doesn't necessarily work for your sibling.
Yeah, I suppose for me, the point that I'm more trying to make is that some of this intergenerational trauma, as we're calling it, people feel ashamed of it. People feel like they can't speak about their past or things that have happened. And I think when I started at the bar, there were some members of the profession who thought, we shouldn't be saying that both your parents have been in prison. But honestly, I used it to my advantage. And I don't think I'd be where I was today if I hadn't had that experience. So it can benefit people sometimes. But Gwen, I think we were talking earlier about the significance of the timing of the trauma. Obviously, I was 10, so maybe fully formed. I don't know. Not quite, but
no. I mean, I think again, what Steve mentioned earlier about neuroscience. I know the study of how we grow a brain and a mind, and is very much ongoing. And there's so much that we don't know. But one of the things that we do know is that to grow a mature adult brain and mind takes at least 21 years. So we don't have fully mature brains and minds until our early 20s. And that's certainly in terms of the actual neuronal structures. But there's also the psychological structures and the social structures that are part of that. We have these vastly expanded brains compared to some of our non-human primate neighbors like gorillas and chimpanzees that enable us to have a whole web of social relationships and to represent ourselves and others in our minds. And of course, it's how we have theatre and how we have drama. So it's an extraordinary thing. So we're still learning about how early childhood adversity can affect later development. But we're also learning that there are critical periods where things must happen for good quality development, and sensitive periods where if certain things happen, the brain is particularly receptive to growth. And we also know that positive experiences in childhood can make a real difference, and they can be protective. Even if you're going through adversity, if you've got just one person in your corner, there's some nice research from back from the 70s that shows that kids who look pretty doubtful at about 10, if they just had one person in their corner, that made a big difference to their outcomes later, which, if you didn't believe about the importance of education before, should tell us now just how important our teachers are, both at primary, but especially at secondary school and with teenagers when young people are moving into their own new identities. So that's a very long answer, but I just think it is very important to hold on to the idea that there is possibility for change, there is possibility for transformation in pretty much everybody, and giving people positive experiences is a way to help them find something good and healthy within them.
And Emma, again, you've obviously been playing not just Jacob's mum, but you're also playing the probation officer, Wendy. And so do you feel that perhaps, I don't know, well, I suppose opening it out, what were the unseen forces that perhaps shaped Jacob as you understand them from playing those two roles?
Well, it's very interesting you saying that about having somebody in your corner, because I do feel like Wendy initially was the person to be that for Jacob. Obviously, he had other people, family members, and again, I don't know the whole history of the web of Jacob's network, but playing Wendy, I know that she did not seek him out, but she did get his file and feel an affinity with his case because her own son has autism, and so therefore she advocated for him specifically and was there for when he came out, as well as beforehand, and managed to speak to, you'll know more about this than me, but managed to speak to the judge presiding to explain the situation, and how a long custodial sentence would not necessarily serve him. So I think, I think playing her, it feels important to observe him, to watch him, to guide him. That seems to be her role, both in real life and in the play, to make sure he's on the safe and the safer path, on the straight and narrow, and to help him make better choices, as the play says.
Yeah, no. I mean, maybe she became one of his protective factors as well. And it's interesting what you say about, me knowing more about it in the courts, because I think probably there's been a real sea change in terms of how the criminal courts now, thankfully, accept and understand this scientific evidence that you're talking about, that the adult, that an adolescent's brain is not fully developed until the age of 25, actually, and there's a great case, an authority called Clarke, that I always roll out when I'm dealing with a young person being sentenced. And it basically says that young people are not magically conferred, they're not magically given all the attributes of adulthood overnight. So they don't go from 17 to 18 and all of a sudden wake up and are, an adult who knows and understands everything that a 40 or 50-year-old would. But finally, we're starting to see that in the criminal courts. We've got one more question that we're going to ask here, and then I think we should put it out to the audience. So I guess just quickly from each of you, if you've got any thoughts on how can our understanding of intergenerational trauma, how can that empower young people to live well and thrive?
Yeah, well, if I ever go at that first, I mean, the first thing I'd say about this development up to the age of 25 and beyond is the thing that we've not said is that girls mature earlier than boys, as well. Their brains develop faster than boys' brains do. So, there's Jacob. How old was he when he committed that murder? 17, 18? 18. It was just crossed 8. He was just becoming an adult. Yeah, 18. Well, 19. Well, the thing about a boy's brain development, as you would all know, is that a boy's brain development, the prefrontal cortex, the judgment center, the CEO of the brain, develops slowly. And so, if you think of it in terms of a car, boys' brains are all accelerator and very little brake. So, they race ahead and do things without thinking. They throw a punch, etc., etc. So, that's something we have to deal with. But what brought change to Jacob's life in the end wasn't that prison sentence, it was love. And every child, every adult, we all spell love time. It's the investment of time. So how do we go about this? Oasis Restore, which is an alternative to a youth jail that Oasis is responsible for, we're therapeutic from the beginning. And when we set up Oasis Restore, I wanted to create a strapline that said, Oasis Restore, setting young people free. But I knew the MOJ would never go with it, so we kind of changed it. But it's love, it's commitment, it's time, it's sitting with a person through their trauma, being there that makes that change. And you don't have to be a psychologist to do that. You need to be somebody who gives time. And the thing I'd say very briefly is this. In our schools across the country, we have loads of people who come and mentor a young person in our schools, which means they come at least once a week. They sit down over a coffee or a tea or a drink, and they listen to a young person and they hear them and they see them, and slowly the young person feels secure in their presence and they're changed by that thing. That's how we change this situation, one person at a time, by investing in them. It's love that wins.
Gwen?
Well, you've just made me think of the wonderful Father Greg Boyle in southern LA, who says that systems change when people change, and people change when they are cherished. But what he talks about in terms of cherishing is kind of what we were talking about in terms of attention and giving people time, just as you're saying. And I would say from 30 odd years of working as a psychotherapist with violence perpetrators, I would say that that most people can change for good, change their minds for good. There are a few who can't, and we need to know much more about them. But most people can change their minds for good. So we need to be encouraging people to do so.
Emma, do you have any? I think they said it. Okay, great. Because we're short on time anyway. I can't see into the audience because the lights are blinding me. So I don't know if anyone has got a hand up. But I think there are some roving mics. If anyone... there's one up here. Oh, I think that's a question for Gwen.
Yeah, I know, super complicated. You couldn't hear the question. So the question is about how intergenerational trauma might get passed down. And your question was about whether it is passed on as a memory, or whether that memory can get changed, or whether there's new trauma. And can I just say that I don't think I can answer this question very sensibly and still get home in time for no. So, but just to say that, I mean, just to pick up on your question, memories can and do change. Our memories, particular for danger, are created to remind us of what's risky. And I think the worry is that parents and people looking after young children who are struggling with painful memories may share unwittingly, may transmit fear and pain in a way that children may find frightening and distressing. So is it about creating new trauma? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And it's complicated because the relationships that children form with their carers are complicated.
And there's I was going to say there's a whole field of science which is epigenetics, and that's not just about the nurture bit, it's about the nature. So a fear that was in your parents or your grandparents can be genetically passed on to you. So you're predispositioned to have in one sense, a memory that isn't even from your lifetime. It's a field of study that's developing all the time, as is all of this stuff.
Fantastic. I think we have a microphone at the back, yes.
Yeah, so going action focused and accepting there is no silver bullet, and we'll just go through the lens of intergenerational trauma or harm for each of you. If the government could bring forward any policy that you think would make the biggest difference to this, what would you all say make the biggest impact?
Better psychological care for women when they're pregnant, continuing psychological care and interventions for families and parents into the age where children go to school, but also working with women who are struggling, women and men, fathers and mothers, who are separated from their children and who need to be reunited with them if it's possible.
For me, I mean, there are so many, but here's just another one. Most primary schools are populated by teachers who are female. We have a huge crisis around manhood, as Gwen's just said. I think we need a policy that helps young men find professions in the healing professions, move into teaching, etc., create role models. It's just one thing, but I think that would be a game changer. That's in great. Many ways.
Do you have one? No. I would raise the age of criminal responsibility. At the minute, it's 11 in the UK, which is the youngest in Europe. It used to be 14, and I think that if we did that, we'd have less young people coming into conflict with the law at a younger age, and we could
it's
divert
10 in
them.
England. It's 12 in Scotland.
It's 11.
It's the worst.
Steve, I'm going to take one more.
Yeah.
Was there one more question? I can see one hand here, and there's one at the front as well. I'm being told that we've only got 2 more minutes, so I'm just going to...
With the wonderful work that you do and the experience that you have and the world we live in today, are you optimistic that things are getting better?
Yes.
Okay, next question. I think we had one down here at the front. I don't know if there's a mic or...
I'll try and shout. Have 2 teenage boys. I'm looking forward to them becoming 25. I have a question about neglect and also loneliness. It's a little bit off topic, but it was mentioned today. And then how social media has impacted that, I think, for many kids and maybe even many people here. So it's not quite an intergenerational harm, I don't think, but I do think we are doing harm to a generation of kids because of what's happening with social media. But I'd just love to get some reflections on that topic and the importance of it.
I'm going to let Steve answer this.
So the question about do we allow mobile phones to kids when you're 11, when you go to secondary school, should mobile phones be banned in secondary schools or locked away, all of those those debates rage. And again, there's so much to say about that. So much brilliant research around it that we could talk about now. I would say this, it's a very simple thing, but I see it time and time again. You're a dad, yeah? A dad who invests time into his children is the biggest safeguard against mobile phones taking over their world. I would say to you and to every dad here, there aren't many Saturdays, nights, when you'll still be able to sit at home and watch a movie with your sons. Many pizza collecting days. For those of you who are parents of younger kids, there aren't many conker collecting days left. We're just coming up to a new season now. Go collect those conkers on a Sunday afternoon. Don't sit at home thinking it's too windy and it's raining and it's cold. Grab every moment to be with your child, because love is spelt time by your 2 boys. And I honestly believe, I'm very hopeful. Honestly, I'm a person of hope. I believe in love. I believe that the universe is about love. And I believe that all we have to do is put that into action in our lives. And I guarantee that is the biggest, safest guard against all the harms that surround each one of us and surround your 2 boys.
Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to the end of that wonderful panel. Thank you, everyone, for staying afterwards. Thank you, Emma, Gwen, and Steve.